Hi everyone, and Spelko here with a podcast about things I love to see in the Resident Evil 2 remake. If you're a die-hard Resident Evil fan like myself, an RE2 remake is something that we've wanted since the announcement and the release of the remake on the GameCube. I am actually someone who has had the privilege of playing these games for the past 20 years. I was able to get my hands on each title as they came out. And when the remake of the first game dropped, it absolutely blew my mind, and truthfully, I was terrified all over again. I remember having to feel some sort of compulsion to bring friends over to play the game so I could try to erase the fear that it brought upon the player. So the remake was really that powerful, and now I speedrun it without issue. In fact, I actually used to bring my GameCube to school at times to play Smash and Resident Evil in class. And what's funny is that the entire classroom would actually watch me play Resident Evil, and it was a really fun, engaging experience. It was something that I was able to show my friends. Something I was talented at, and they were amazed how I was just able to run through these games in such a fast manner and completely erase all the fear from the game for them, to where it was an enjoyable and enlightening experience for them. They were able to laugh at how scared the game made them, and that was something that was really fun. So it's no surprise that when Capcom announced that they were making the Resident Evil 2 remake, that in fact they had been working on it since August of 2015, the fans were ecstatic. Nothing could have dampened our spirits that day. We were finally getting what we wanted, and that feels really good. Of course, for the past few years, fans have been discussing what could possibly be in the Resident Evil 2 remake. What could they add to improve on the formula? What could they possibly do to make an already seemingly perfect game even better than the original release? It had me thinking, which is why I compiled this list together. Initially, this list was not made with a particular order in mind, but as I got to finishing it up, I realized that there were some things I would like to see over others to make it into the final game. So, let's get started. Number 10, Epilogues. This is on the bottom of the list because every time you beat Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, you unlock up to 8 epilogues, which briefly say what happened to each of the Raccoon City incident survivors, except Rebecca. Resident Evil 2 briefly ends where Leon and company decide to put an end to Umbrella. However, seeing some sort of visualization of Leon being brought in as a government agent, Claire departing to Europe to find Chris, and even Sherry and Ada during the aftermath would be pretty neat. Of course, Sherry finally spills beans of what happened to her during the event in Resident Evil 6, which for me was a highlight of that game. Ada's story is also covered in Darkside Chronicles. Now, with all that in mind, it's the least important thing to me, but it'd still be pretty cool to see. After all, it was awesome seeing Chris and Jill go into the Spencer estate leading into Lost in Nightmares at the end of Revelations 1. And to Rebecca fans, don't fret. We're finally getting closure in the upcoming CGI movie, Biohazard Vendetta, for she will be starring in it along with Chris and Leon. So, that would just leave us with Billy. Come on, Capcom, just give us Billy. Number 9, a boss rush mode. One of the things that made the original release of Resident Evil 2 so memorable, especially in comparison to the first game, was the inclusion of boss fights. I mean, way more boss fights. To see these fights brought into the remake of 2, which I'm going to call Remake 2 for now, it's going to be super exciting. I remember getting to the alligator as a kid, and that was a huge deal. Me and my childhood friends would talk extensively about the gator. Like, that was a big deal for us. Like, all the people in the neighborhood would be like, dude, did you get to the gator? That battle put hair in our chests. Also, I live in New Orleans, so giant gators could totally be plausible. Say a T-virus outbreak took place here. And if Resident Evil 2 Remake 2, is planning to be more visually advanced and as tactical of a game as the GameCube remake, please give us a way to replay the fights to our heart's content so we can take in all the terrifying designs and beautiful HD remaster. Until then, I suppose I'll just replay Darkside Chronicles. Number 8, Resident Evil 3 Evidence. Now, let me explain this. For all the fans of the Resident Evil games, they should know that RE3 takes place before the events of RE2. Joe explores the RPD station well before Leon and Claire even reach it. However, since Resident Evil 2 is released before Resident Evil 3, the only clue shown that referenced Resident Evil 3 in any way was Brad's zombified self underneath the RPD station's entrance. Of course, you can only see Brad in Resident Evil 2 by not picking up any items on the way to the police station, so here's an actual list that I compiled within this list to show physical evidence that Jill and Nemesis were in the station. Number 1. Marvin mentioning the presence of Jill and Nemesis when encountered by Leon and Claire, Scenario A. If Marvin were in the station when this happened, which he was because we clearly see him supposedly unconscious in Resident Evil 3, I'm sorry, but I think all that commotion that Nemesis and Jill would cause would wake anyone up. If I heard a giant monster go, "Stars!" outside my window, I would be fully alarmed. Number 2. Surveillance footage. A police station ought to have a security camera room somewhere. It would be really neat to find a monitor with the recordings caught on tape with Jill in combat against Nemesis. Perhaps even footage of Brad being killed by Nemesis at the entrance would be on tape as well. I mean, after all, in the remake of Resident Evil 1, if you examine Kenneth's corpse, you find a tape that you can later watch in the laboratory of him being devoured by a zombie, and that was really cool. Just show us something with people battling Nemesis. I think that'd be really awesome. However, I kind of doubt that there actually would be a surveillance room. I mean, this is the same police station that doesn't have an employee restroom. I'm serious. Go play the game and try to find a bathroom in the police station or anywhere in a game for that matter. In fact, the only bathroom that I can find was on the tram where you fight the Birkin forms leading into the laboratory. I kid you not, that is the only bathroom that I've personally found. The only surveillance area I can think of is the place right before you get to the laboratory. You need to get the key in Scenario B to turn on the tram, and you have to look in the camera and you see Mr. X smash the camera. Yeah. Number 3. Collateral damage. There is absolutely no way that a giant monster would leave the police station to pursue Jill without leaving a trace. Perhaps have damaged walls and doors. Rocket launcher damage, aesthetically somewhere, broken window where Nemesis enters the station, or even have like his empty rocket launcher somewhere on the floor. It'd be really cool just to see evidence of that. That would be pretty awesome. Truthfully, this is low on the list because it is just fan service, but even some minor files or reports of Nemesis in Raccoon City during the outbreak would be really cool. In fact, I can even argue that it would help tie Nemesis into the continuity a lot more. Number 7. New Game Plus modes. Resident Evil is known for post-game content that helps to relieve the tension that the main campaign creates, such as unlocking infinite ammo-based weapons, and even with the recent release of RE0 HD, where you're able to play as an overpowered Wesker in Wesker mode. Ironically, the remake of the first game did quite the opposite with New Game Plus modes, such as Invisible Enemy, One Dangerous Zombie, and Real Survivor, modes that add a serious challenge. Of course, these New Game Plus tension relievers are well welcomed, but I would be far more impressed by the inclusion of similar modes. After all, Invisible Enemy made its way into Revelations 2. I'm only talking about the main campaign here. I'm well aware of EX Battle, Fort Survivor, and Tofu, but those are just mini-games. I'm looking for new and inventive ways to progress through the main campaign, so tell me what you think. What ideas would you have? Number 6. Mercenaries. This goes without saying, but it's nearly impossible nowadays to release a Resident Evil game without having some take on a highly addicting and entertaining bonus game known as Mercenaries. The first game to actually have a Mercenaries minigame was Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. However, Resident Evil 4 was the one that set the standards for what the minigame would play like in future releases. The game itself revolves around killing enemies to sustain a combo, and each kill counts towards a score. Holding a combo increases that score, and you do have a time limit to kill as many things as you can. You can increase your time by collecting the bonuses for performing melee kills. In Resident Evil 3, the minigame worked a bit differently. You had a destination, and survivors to save along the way. Every kill granted you a time bonus instead of saving a survivor. You would earn currency depending on the score you obtained while playing the game. The currency was for an endgame shop that unlocked infinite ammo for various weapons in the main campaign. The Saturn port of Resident Evil 1, the DualShock edition of Resident Evil 2 and onwards, And Resident Evil Code Veronica, they all had battle games, but they were nothing like the mercenary games featured in the actual titles. The battle games themselves play by completely different rules. They usually include you having to clear a room full of enemies, have a limited set of items available to you for you to use. Also, in the EX battle mode of Resident Evil 2, you're able to make save states. That way you can pick up where you left off in case you actually messed up. You actually had to beat the modes, like there was an end result. So, like I said, it was more in tune with the actual main campaign of the series. Of course, you were able to play as multiple characters from each respective game. So that was always a fun bonus because there was various differences to each character. In conclusion, I'm very supportive of mercenaries being in Resident Evil 2. I can think of all the ways that the very creative enemies in that game, how they would interact with the environment. Lickers on ceilings, a gator chasing you around. Different things like that would really enrich an experience for a minigame. Number 5, Scenario B consequences. So, I'm going to have to explain this one as well. For those familiar with Resident Evil 2, certain actions that you take in the Scenario A campaign will later on affect decisions that need to be made in Scenario B. However, it's very small things. Nothing that drastically changes the story. Nothing that will really break the continuity. Which is fine. I'm not looking for any of that. What I would like to see in particular are things that drastically change the path I need to take in Scenario B. Personally, I've always found the Scenario B campaign to be more interesting to run through. Mostly because you can already see certain things that the character in Scenario A has done before the character in Scenario B has reached the police station. However, I always question the timing of this, mostly because in order to reach the police station in the Scenario B campaign, it's a much shorter route. For example, in Scenario A, you start off in the street, you go through the gun shop, you go through behind the gun shop into the basketball court, then you go up the stairs, down the stairs, over a garbage can, then onto the bus, and to the front of the police station. And finally, you enter the main entrance and then go into the police station. I know, right? So, while compared to Scenario B, all you need to do is run down the street, enter a door, run to the right, grab a key, open it, and you're going to realize that you're where the valve would be in the Scenario A campaign. So, the only explanation is that the character in Scenario B would reach the police station well before the character in Scenario A. Which is, I guess, a really good explanation as to why the character in Scenario A doesn't hear the helicopter crash. Which the character in Scenario B witnesses the helicopter itself crash to the police department. Which, by the way, is probably the most hilarious FMV I've ever seen in any video game, period. To my knowledge, the things that truly affect Scenario B in Resident Evil 2 and Scenario A is, number 1, killing the gator, number 2, using the cable on a certain outlet. You can decide to use the western area or the eastern area. It doesn't really matter. But no matter which one you do use, the opposite one will be flooded with zombies. Number 3, deciding to pick up the submachine guns and even the side pack. If you pick those up, then the character in Scenario B won't have any access to it. And number 4, using your thumb in Scenario A in order to access the monitor, which will lead to a room in Scenario B where the character can use their thumb as well, and their fingerprint would open up a hidden door with hidden items inside of it. Now, those are the only things that I could think of, straight off the top of my head. I'm sure I overlooked something. If you know what it is, please comment. Please tell me what it is that I've missed. I've always felt that Scenario B was a much harder version of Resident Evil 2. It's a much harder run. And that's no mistake. I'm sure Capcom intentionally made Scenario B harder to kind of treat it like the New Game Plus, something that would challenge the people that master Scenario A. I'd like to see more cause and effect in the game. Say certain health items aren't available in Scenario B because you've picked them all up in Scenario A, or even certain handgun ammo just isn't there, or maybe there's a lower supply of it because, again, you've exhausted your resources in Scenario A. You have to plan ahead. There's more of a permanent change. In fact, that could even add to a New Game Plus style mode. Something that really affects the overall game as a whole. Something that would add a true challenge. Something more than just overlapping cutscenes and retracing the other character's steps. I haven't completely figured out of all the possible changes that could be made in a quote-unquote cause and effect scenario. So, if you can think of anything that would really change the scenario B after playing scenario A, do share your idea. Let me know what you think. I'm putting this there so we can get your mind thinking. That's what I want to hear. I want to hear your opinions about this matter. Number 4, Sherry and Ada campaigns. Now, I know this one's a bit of a stretch, but hear me out. Imagine being able to play through the events of Resident Evil 2 through Sherry and Ada's eyes. I would imagine that it's more in tone with the Separate Ways campaign featured in Resident Evil 4, which, if you remember, is very well received by fans. It was fun being able to see Resident Evil 4 unfold through Ada's side. Her perspective was very important, and it enriched the overall experience of the game. As far as the gameplay, I would imagine Ada's campaign is more in tune with the traditional Resident Evil experience, whereas Sherry would have a very stealth approach to the game, forcing you to avoid enemies altogether, using the environment or traps to set for enemies, and, more puzzle influences of her story. Things that would really make sense for a girl of her size and age. The story of these campaigns can show off how Ada and Sherry came to be at the RPD police station. It can also show more stuff that happened after the game events themselves. I know we got to see a glimpse of Ada's side of her story through Dark Side Chronicles, but I would love to play that in a traditional Resident Evil format rather than just, a first-person light gun shooter, which I'm not going to discredit because Dark Side Chronicles is truly a fascinating experience. If you've never played it, it's definitely something you need to add to your list. Especially as a Resident Evil fan, you need to play Dark Side Chronicles, which I feel is a much better game than Umbrella Chronicles. But that's just a personal opinion. I also feel that there's some things that were left out of Sherry discussing what happened to her following the events of Resident Evil 2 while she's speaking to Jake in Resident Evil 6. I would really like to see more about how she got into the organization that she became a part of. Why was Simmons her boss? The guy was a maniac. How did she get involved, and did she ever find personal closure with her parents? There's a lot of questions I still feel that Sherry can answer, and I hope you guys agree. Now, I feel like this one is going to divide people quite a bit, but here it goes. Number 3, online co-op. Yes, I know what you're thinking. We should not have co-op in a Resident Evil game. Doesn't make it scary. Granted. But let's treat it like this is Resident Evil 0. In fact, a Resident Evil 0 is the reason why I even bring this up. If you ever have a chance, you should really go on the Resident Evil YouTube channel and look up the developer diaries for Resident Evil 0. There are 4 in number, and they really go into deep detail of how they remastered Resident Evil 0, why they even made the game a partner zap system, and the concepts the prototype originally had. Now, some of the concepts of the original prototype of Resident Evil 0 really interested me. They discussed the possibility of the game where you could still beat it whether or not either Rebecca or Billy died. So, there was a possibility in the game where Rebecca and Billy could actually die and you'd get a game over. But if one character died, you were able to beat the rest of the game as that other character. They scrapped the idea eventually because they felt, it's going to just mess up with the whole continuity of the series since Rebecca could possibly die in the beginning of Resident Evil 0, which wouldn't make sense because she's gone on to live in Resident Evil 1. With that in mind, let's think of how we could possibly implement this co-op option to Resident Evil 2. Now, they even had an idea to make the game multiplayer, like split screen for the N64, which of course, I don't know why they scrapped, but I always thought it'd be really awesome to play Resident Evil 0 with 2 players. And I'm sure there's some genius modder out there who managed to actually make a multiplayer build of the game. And wherever you are, hit me up. I want to find you. I want that build. Please, let me have it so I can do such a thing. I've entertained myself with this concept quite a few times, to the point where I've dubbed it the A-B scenario. Imagine you're able to simultaneously do both scenarios. while one player controls Leon and another player controls Claire. Of course, while you progress through the story, that player is able to control Ada at one point, the other player is able to control Sherry. And sure, certain events will have to play out at different times. And I'm sure Capcom could figure out a way to cleverly make these events, take place at different times. So anyway, I would imagine it would feel like Resident Evil 5, but with the original classic gameplay elements. How you're able to trade ammo and items and stuff like that in real time. It'll also be really cool since you have limited resources, so you have to learn how to share herbs and ammo. I think those concepts would really play well in an online co-op, and would really make it for an enriching experience. Imagine if Resident Evil 0 did have the multiplayer like the prototype intended for the game to have. You'd be able to go through the training facility, the Ecliptic Express, and even the lab, and different styles. You'd be able to have one person clear out a certain area of the map while another person investigates, assigning roles, like you should be able to in a co-op games. I think it would be brilliant for Resident Evil 2 because the game itself focuses on the cause and effect of scenario A and B. So, if we have that concept in mind, and you take how Resident Evil 0 loads two different rooms at any given time when the characters are separated, which is why whenever you leave it, say Billy in a room with a zombie, the zombie will attack him in real time because both rooms are loaded. That's actual technology that Resident Evil 0 has. There's no reason for the Resident Evil 2 remake to not have it, especially if a game that precedes it has that technology. After all, if you remember playing Outbreak during the glory days, when the American PS2 version still had online servers, you know just how fun Outbreak was. So, if we just, take that concept, apply it to Resident Evil 2, and maybe, like I said, the AB version scenario would of course accommodate for a simultaneous play, just imagine the possibilities of what we could have. We would probably have the best co-op survival horror game ever made. Number 2, new enemy types. This goes without saying, and it's fairly obvious. Now, I feel that the Crimson Heads need to make a return. In fact, I feel that the Crimson Head zombies should already be established in the game. The reason for that is because if you know anything about the V-Act process, which is a mutation that a zombie goes through, which eventually the end result is a licker, Crimson Heads serve as the in-between between a zombie and a licker. Eventually, the Crimson Head zombie will turn into a licker. That is the V-Act process. But what goes beyond licker? I would love to see further mutations, something that really shows what the T-Virus is capable of. Or maybe even more G-monsters running around the facilities. That would be very interesting to see as well. In the Resident Evil remake, we were introduced to Lisa Trevor. How about bringing, something that's infected by the Nemesis parasite that's not Nemesis? Maybe we can see other creatures that are like that. Maybe we can see a combination of these mutations. Perhaps there will be a character like Lisa Trevor. What do you think could be in this game? Think about enemy types. I gave you what I thought of. I would like to see your opinion on that as well. On a side note, if you found the original Resident Evil intro to be pretty difficult, imagine how much more crazy that would be if all the zombies were Crimson Heads. Number 1. A compilation of all the content ever released in Resident Evil 2 across all consoles into a single game. This one is number 1 because I feel like this is something that everyone who has ever played Resident Evil 2 can agree on. Despite the fact that Resident Evil has a reputation for being this amazing game, there's just way too much exclusive content. The only way to truly experience Resident Evil 2 for all it has to offer is to own it across multiple consoles. While this makes it to where every version of the game stands out in a unique way, it's a bit, let's just say, troublesome in our wallets. In order to experience Nightmare Mode in Resident Evil 2, you have to obtain a Dreamcast and get the Dreamcast version of the game. The thing is that a Dreamcast usually goes for about $30, whereas the Dreamcast version of Resident Evil 2 can go anywhere between $40 to $80. And of course, there's people that are like, well, just get the GameCube version. Well, you do need a GameCube, and then you also need like $60 to get the GameCube version of the game. And the Dreamcast version of Nightmare Mode is not even on the GameCube version. What gives? The GameCube version has all the DualShock modes, So it makes the PS2 version obsolete, but the Dreamcast version has a mode that you can't even obtain, let alone the PC version has the outfit select at the beginning, and the PC version does have everything except for Nightmare mode. The N64 version has the newly adapted controls that were featured in the HD remakes of the games. It also has the item randomizer and the ability to change the violence level and the color of the blood in the game. Plus, the N64 version and the GameCube versions have it to where Leon and Claire are compacted onto one cartridge or the disc for the GameCube. Yeah, the GameCube version also has the cheats that you can enter that the N64 version had, which makes your characters invincible and even gives you infinite items. And oddly enough, there's an infinity sign and knife. How do you have an infinite knife? The only solution I can truly think about, which is something I feel the remake of Resident Evil 1 overlooked, is to include the original game with the remake, which is something you think they would have done initially, but they didn't. I mean, Metroid Prime and Metroid Zero Mission both contain the NES Metroid on the same disc or cartridge. Sure, the NES Metroid is much smaller, but so are the PlayStation games. Those games can fit onto a Blu-ray disc without any issue. Something that I would like to see on the PS4 version of the Resident Evil 2 remake would be a visualization of your character's life and status condition by utilizing the PS4's light on the controller. It would definitely pay a homage to the VMU support that was exclusive to the Dreamcast version of the game, which allowed you to see your character's life and status condition by using the VMU. Now, it's a very small aesthetic thing, but it would be really cool. I'm fully aware that Capcom is hard at work making both the Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 2 games. Now, I know this might have sounded like a big rant, and I'm sorry if it came off that way, but really, I just want to expand people's minds, and what should they expect from a Resident Evil 2 remake? After all, Capcom stated that they started to make this game because of fan support. So if they really want fan support, perhaps they should listen to us too for the content that should go into this game. So I hope you really enjoyed listening, and thank you so much. It's been almost 30 minutes and you probably haven't realized it yet, but I really appreciate your time. Comment, let me know what you think. What would you want out of a Resident Evil 2 remake? What terrors lie ahead of us? All we can really do at this point is just wait around until we're able to go into Raccoon City once more. Again, thanks for listening, and stay awesome. Feel free to subscribe. You can also follow me on Twitter at BelkoAG. You can even email me at belkoag@gmail.com. I will be making another podcast that will focus on things I would like to see in a Resident Evil 3 remake. Now, I know the likelihood of that happening is very low, but I'm sure that with enough fan support, and say perhaps the Resident Evil 2 remake is well received by fans and the general gaming audience alike, it can still happen. At this point, they might as well remake the original trilogy. They've come this far. They might as well finish it at this point. Again, thanks for listening, and stay awesome.